Good evening, Southland and 162 parents. Thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time. It doesn't seem possible, but we're coming to the end of the first semester. And upon reflection, I think that there have been some very positive things that have happened. The first thing that happened was that we welcomed 3,000 children back into our 8 buildings, and that in itself, in the middle of a pandemic, I think was absolutely wonderful. But I did begin to feel the students begin to settle in. Remember, they'd been away from us minimally for a year, most of them. And Zoom, Google Meets, whatever, however you're communicating with us other than in person is very, very different than being in a classroom with the teachers. But as time went on, we saw above the mask um, the smiles, the inquisitive looks, all the things that we associate with in-person learning and what we look forward to as educators. But I did want to take this opportunity this afternoon to talk with you about our reopening in 2022. And I'm talking to you prior to Christmas and prior to the formal letter coming home this afternoon because it's something that we have to think through, we have to plan for. This is probably one of the largest initiatives that we've ever undertaken. But before I tell you about January 2022, I want to talk just a little bit about what we experienced this school year. First of all, contact tracing. And a few of you have called the district office, you've asked about this. Contact tracing in an elementary school environment, particularly ours. Let me just say ours because I don't know that everyone is doing this. Our children in the elementary schools under the 7th grade level are all self-contained. They don't move. And so there's one teacher, all of our teachers that do specials, the music, the art, the technology come into the classroom. So when you're talking about contact tracing, you're talking about something that's relatively simple. And if there is a child that encounters or has exposure to COVID, we know what we're looking at because we're looking at this little box. We're looking at where the children are spaced. And so I give credit to Mrs. Deborah Dusky, who is the person that's in charge of our COVID initiative. She's done a magnificent job of contact tracing, but also a good job of communicating with you and with the schools. But to be quite honest, on the 162 side, although we were prepared for whatever might happen, the numbers of children with even exposure were relatively small. But it's because they're self-contained and they're in a contained environment that we manage. Now, I know that possibly some of the teachers, absolutely some of the teachers, would like to go back to having music and art and other kinds of activities in individual classrooms, but that increases the environment that we have to monitor, and it also increases the possibility of COVID. A high school and Huth is a middle school, but remember, Huth is more akin to a high school environment than it is to the elementary schools. Those children move. Those children move. And that is the basic difference in terms of contact tracing. You cannot have a middle school or a high school in particular, ours is Southland, and keep the students in the same classroom. Um, what about the labs? What about technology? What about dance? What about this? What about that? On and on and on. And so we anticipated in the beginning that we would have a problem, but actually we did not. We were shocked. Very, very few cases, and the two entities, 162 and Southland, were basically with the same small percentages over time of any kind of COVID exposure or even a positive designation until 3 weeks ago. Uh, 162 stayed constant, and we still have very, very few children. But 3 weeks ago, we began to see the results of, I think, basketball and going to other places, other schools. We began to see the results of our Christmas programs, and we did not have an outbreak. Some of you use that term. An outbreak means to the CDC, to the IDPH, and therefore to us, that 10% of the population has been exposed, and that has never been the case. But I value the way that you feel, because I feel the tension, I feel the stress. As I've said to you before, I don't want even a cold within our environment, although we know that that's impossible. And so when we're talking about contact tracing, that is something that we take seriously, with names on desk, names on seats in the buses, but it is more complex in a high school. And I just think it's very interesting, the difference between the two. But never, never were we in danger of an outbreak on either side of the house. Now, you may ask me, why am I talking about 162 and Southland at the same time? We're all one family. And because there are children that are on the 162 side that are in Southland, then I wanted to make sure that I was communicating with everyone. Actually, over 3,000 families. And so that's why I'm communicating. But another issue, and it's an issue for me, and I do want to comment on this. When you call and say, just close the school, close the district. Nobody's ever said close the district, but close the school. Wherever we have 1 or 2 cases, that's not possible for me to do. We communicate on a daily basis. Anytime we have even one child that has a positive diagnosis, we communicate if there's exposure. But it is the CDC, IDPH, that gives us permission to close. I can't make that decision. And never were we in that category of schools that they would have closed. And so I think, once again, I congratulate Mrs. Dusky. She did a magnificent job of bringing us to this. But now, today, we're talking about reopening in January 2022. What does this look like? We're going to continue with masks. We continue with our sanitation. We continue with social distancing. We're maintaining our class sizes. All those things are givens. But there's something else I think we need to go the final step. And that is we're going to change our opening date. Our opening date for 162 and for Southland will be January 10th. And we will welcome all students back, we will welcome all students back who have a negative test designation. And so you may be thinking, how is that going to happen? First of all, I've met with all of the 162 teachers, all the Southland teachers, all employees, no matter what their category. All of us are going to test, and we're going to test and be prepared to open our buildings on January 5th. And so they're going to be testing on the 3rd and the 4th to try and get within that 48-hour time frame, because we intend to come back to school on January 5th. But 2 differences. Number one, 162 will open with 3 days of e-learning, the 5th, 6th, and 7th. And then on the 10th, we come up with everyone coming in person back to school. And Southland will have 5th, 6th, and 7th opening for those students who did not take their final exams. And so I'm sending you something that indicates that we're undertaking testing 3,500 people. We employ a little over 500 people. All of them will be fully tested. All of them will present their negative diagnosis to us prior to coming into the building. And we're sending you information you can pick up at the district office or your local schools, and each of you will have a letter that indicates that a test And we're asking that you do that 48 hours before your children return to school. We're determined on the 10th that we have a negative COVID environment. In other words, no one is coming in that does not have a current test, so that we can begin with everyone within our environment being relaxed. You can be more comfortable. But a question that would be logical is, all right, everyone returns back to school on the 10th with a negative testing result. What happens after that? We're going to have to continue to test on a periodic basis to make sure that we can maintain this environment. And it is huge, over 3,000 people testing. But this process is simple, but I did want to tell you so that you can begin to plan, first of all, for a January 10th opening, but also so that you can read all the information that I'm sending, and therefore begin thinking about the fact that in order to have a COVID-free environment, we must all test. Now, generally, when I come to you, I talk about vaccinations. We'll continue with that. Our first clinic is going to be on January 5th. We'll continue every Wednesday to have clinics, continue to give boosters, and then on the 8th, we will have our huge clinic where we welcome all families. We're going to continue to do all that. But that is not sufficient, I don't think, to make sure that we have a peaceful, hopefully COVID-free environment. And in order to do that, we have to continuously test. And so we will give you that information as we move forward. But you do see the timelines and the information that I'm going to send home. And we're asking you to relieve the stress, and because of the fact that I know that you're worried because I'm worried. I know that. Because we don't want any of our children to experience COVID, but we also don't want any of the adults who are involved with the children. So January 10th is our new date to return to school. Why are we doing that? Because we're going to spend the week of the 3rd through the 7th testing, making sure that everyone who is going to interact with our children has been tested, and that we have a negative test result. But we're also going to be distributing kits to you so that you can test at home. And so then you too will know whether your child is negative or positive. Obviously, a positive designation means that you can't come back to school. But we've done everything that we can do. I think that this new variant is aggressive. I know it is by its result. And so therefore, the last step that we can take is to make sure that everyone within our environment is tested. And so you might be thinking, I don't know about testing. This is different than vaccinations. Vaccinations, I always say, is up to you. It's up to you. And you've made a good decision. You've decided to vaccinate or not. This is something totally different. This is a very simple test. You are familiar with the procedure. We're also going to provide videos so that you get a comfort level with it. But if we don't know if your child is negative or positive, then everyone is at risk. And so I really absolutely feel that if we work together, the 3,500 of us, we can open with a COVID-free environment and we can move forward. And so I'm sending all this information home tonight, but I did want to explain this. Activities, you watch the news just like I do. You know the NBA and the NFL or whatever, they're struggling. So we are not going to be playing competitive sports until the positivity rates stabilizes, and when we can see that this variance is not as aggressive as it seems to be at this point. I'm not a doctor, but the numbers indicate that this is more aggressive, although it's not as deadly as the Delta virus. So if there's a positive, and I don't know if that's a positive or not, it's just a fact. So that is our goal. I thank you as usual. I wanted to share information about contact tracing. We've always done that. We will continue to do that. We will continue until the end of the school year with masks, continue our sanitation, continue all the things that we know contribute to the safety of your children. However, at this point in the evolution of the pandemic, I think it's going to be absolutely necessary that we take the last step, and that's why everyone that comes in our environment is going to have a negative test. And I ask all of you, when you receive your test at home, would you please follow the instructions? We'll be communicating. But if you think about it, a COVID-free environment is really the goal that we've always had. It's the goal that we have for ourselves in the workplace, but it's the goal that we have for our children. So thank you very much for listening. Immediately after I finish with this taping, information will come home to you in writing, and then we will begin this whole process. But the process will not begin until January 3rd. We want everyone to relax and have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas. I think it will be safer than it was last Christmas, but I'm looking forward to the opening of a new school year, as I always do. But I think that we must open with a more aggressive attitude. And that last step, the only thing that we can do is to continually test and make sure that our buildings, all 8 of them, are COVID-free environments. Once again, thank you very, very much for listening to me. And we will be communicating in the next 2 weeks as we move towards the 10th. Stay safe.